respect that we have developed over the centuries. All those communities, individually and collectively, make the structure of the mosaic of the state of Bosnia and Herzegovina. That is the way things are, and that is how things will remain. At the same time, Bosnia and Herzegovina as a meeting place of cultures was a thorn in the side of policies based on the idea of the impossibility of living together and the necessity of confrontation. Such policies led to the terrifying war in Bosnia and Herzegovina from 1992 to 1995. That war culminated in the genocide in Srebrenica. Resolutions from that period, adopted by the United Nations General Assembly and the Security Council, as well as the reports of the UN Secretary General and the judgments of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, qualify the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina as an international armed conflict in which neighboring countries participated. The judgment passed by the Hague Criminal Tribunal conclude the joint criminal enterprises took place. The goal of those enterprises was the elimination of certain ethnic groups from parts of the territory of Bosnia and Herzegovina, so that those territories would ultimately be annexed to neighboring countries. This was the most serious violation of international general and humanitarian law. Bosnia and Herzegovina has gone through an arduous peace-building process since the conclusion of the Dayton Peace Agreement. However, we still face numerous challenges. Some of the major challenges are certain policies in Bosnia and Herzegovina and the neighborhood which have never abandoned the wartime goals of dividing our country. There are parties in Bosnia and Herzegovina that are part of the broad wave of right-wing populism in Europe. They openly claim that Bosnia and Herzegovina is not sustainable because, according to them, it is not possible for Muslims and Christians to live together. Muslims and Christians live and can live together. That life does have a perspective. What certainly has no perspective are retrograde policies that oppose such life. Bosnia and Herzegovina has a centuries-old history and is a living example and proof of the civilizational idea that people of different religions, nations, and cultures can live together. The fact is that Bosnia and Herzegovina, even despite the war aimed at its destruction, managed to survive. That shows the exceptional resilience of my country. Majority of people in Bosnia and Herzegovina want to live in peace with their differences. There's enough strength for such Bosnia and Herzegovina to persevere. I am convinced that that will be the case. Respected President, the experience of Bosnia and Herzegovina shows that the rule of law is a crucial factor of peace building. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, formed by the UN, granted the victims the minimum of justice. It sent a message to criminals that their actions will not go unpunished and that they will be brought to justice and face the consequences for their actions. Moreover, there were other international community bodies that made a huge contribution to the building and the protection of peace, primarily the Office of the High Representative and the Peace Implementation Council. Both of those bodies were established on the basis of Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, which mandates the intervention of the international community in order to protect peace. The establishment of those bodies was also confirmed by the relevant resolutions of the Security Council. Consequently, the closure of those bodies is possible only following a new decision of the UN Security Council. It's not time for that yet. Please allow me to remind you of the international supervision that was present in some significantly developed countries, such as Germany's, with even greater executive powers than the Office of the High Representative in Bosnia and Herzegovina. That supervision was ended after 45 years of existence, only once the necessary prerequisites for that were created. The Office of the High Representative and the Peace Implementation Council have been helping domestic political actors to implement reforms for the past 27 years. Through joint efforts, we managed to unite the three once warring armies into a single armed forces. We also united the three intelligence services, tech systems, judiciaries, etc. Thanks to those reforms and the existence of the armed forces and other state institutions of Bosnia and Herzegovina, even after the gradual withdrawal of 60,000 international troops from Bosnia and Herzegovina, the peace remained intact. The past year brought attacks against the 27 years of implementation of the Dayton Peace Agreement. In particular, there was an attempt to disband state institutions established on the basis of the clear provisions of the Dayton Peace Agreement. Thanks to the action of the Office of the High Representative and the Peace Implementation Council member states led by the United States of America, the attack on state institutions was stopped and peace was observed once again. That demonstrated the expediency and efficiency of the international community institutions in Bosnia and Herzegovina. There have been requests for the closure of the Office of the High Representative in the past. More recently, there were frequent requests that the High Representative take steps that would weaken the unity of Bosnia and Herzegovina and introduce additional ethnic divisions. According to the Dayton Peace Agreement and the UN Charter, it is the obligation of the High Representative to protect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Bosnia and Herzegovina and not to contribute to its disintegration. Respected President, in addition to the civilian international presence in Bosnia and Herzegovina, there is also the international military in the country, specifically the EUFOR mission and the NATO headquarters with a total of 1,100 troops. Bosnia and Herzegovina is not special in that regard. Many more developed sovereign states need the presence of international military forces in much larger numbers than is the case in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The international military presence was established by the Dayton Peace Agreement. UN Security Council confirms the EUFOR mission's mandate on an annual basis. The Security Council will vote on the EUFOR mandate again in less than 1 month. It is very important for the stability and peace in Bosnia and Herzegovina and the region that this resolution is adopted. However, it is important to emphasize that in any case, according to the Dayton Peace Agreement, NATO has the right and obligation to deploy its forces in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Also, the Presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina has made decisions in the past giving consent to the presence of EUFOR and NATO forces without any time limits. Those decisions are a sufficient legal basis for the presence of an international military mission in Bosnia and Herzegovina until the Presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina takes a different position. Respected President, Bosnia and Herzegovina's foreign policy goals are membership in the European Union and NATO. The June 2022 session of the European Council opened up the space for granting Bosnia and Herzegovina the status of a candidate for membership in the European Union if certain conditions are met. Bosnia and Herzegovina has recently made certain progress in terms of fulfilling the 14 priorities defined in the opinion of the European Commission on Bosnia and Herzegovina's application for EU membership. We fulfilled some of the said priorities in full and some partially. I'm pleased to say that in the past weeks we have continued meeting those priorities. I expect that we will continue making even more progress after the general elections that will take place on October 2nd next month. I also expect Bosnia and Herzegovina to be granted the EU membership candidate status as soon as possible. Regarding our relations with NATO, Bosnia and Herzegovina is part of the Membership Action Plan. In terms of reforms that NATO expects from us as an aspirant country, the Presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina adopted the reform program, which is our annual obligation. Respected President, regional cooperation is one of the foreign policy goals of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Bosnia and Herzegovina wants good relations with its neighbors, with mutual appreciation, respect, and also the principle of reciprocity. That is the only way to build relations with Bosnia and Herzegovina. Everyone in our region must understand that the geostrategic and geopolitical configuration of the region is completed. The path to security and prosperity is the path of mutual cooperation and solving the open issues in accordance with the principles of international law. We are all equal in the region. No one can dominate anyone else. We all need peace and stability. Respected President, the whole world needs peace and stability. All current disputes in the world should be resolved on the principles of international law with the involvement of the international judicial institutions. That is why it is very important to strengthen multilateral mechanisms and institutions. Therefore, I believe that the strength and authority of the UN as a key multilateral mechanism must be fortified. Thank you for your attention.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Chair of the Presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina for the statement just made, and I request the protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly, we are here, the address by His Excellency Chandrika Persad Santokhi, President of the Republic of Suriname. I request the protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Chandrika Persad Santokhi, President of the Republic of Suriname, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Good morning, President of the General Assembly, Xaba Korosi, Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, colleague heads, heads of delegations, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, I congratulate you on your election to preside over the 77th session of this august body, and I assure you of my country's full support during your presidency. Mr. President, at last year's general debate, I called on leaders to build a better world, a planet for those living today, but more so for those generations yet to come. So today, I would like to take you back to 1992, when Stephen Kulis Suzuki spoke at the United Nations Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. She appealed to everyone to help stop the destruction of the Earth's resources. And now, 2022, we are here. The current state of the world does not need another wake-up call. It is time for real action. And while some progress has been made, we have not yet been successful in overcoming the challenges. Meanwhile, the threats have been adding up. Economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic slowed. Worsening climate crisis with extreme weather events, biodiversity loss and ecosystems collapse, increasing levels of poverty and hunger, and yes, a humanitarian crisis. The global community is faced with escalating consumer and fuel prices that have risen substantially, damaging living standards, particularly for the vulnerable. Therefore, I want you to take a moment and ask yourself, have we treated our Earth in a sustainable way? Are we better prepared for the next pandemic? Has access to climate financing improved? Have we addressed the root causes for the humanitarian crisis and unregulated migration? Have we ensured that the most vulnerable in our societies were lifted out of poverty and hunger? And have we provided for their needs? And we are taking enough actions together as one? Mr. President, Secretary General, colleague heads, we all can conclude that we are not ready and have not taken all the necessary measures. And as leader of my country, Suriname, a small country, one of only 3 carbon-negative countries in the world, I appeal to you today, let us uphold our firm commitment to international principles and international law by all when addressing the global challenges and threats. Today, I urge the United Nations to exert its important role and place in defense of these principles through meaningful dialogue and constructive engagement as tools. These developments will take us further from our shared objectives in 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the promise of leaving no one behind. Mr. President, no country is immune to the climate crisis. Over the past months, Suriname has been affected by excessive rainfall, resulting in floods in many parts of the country. Due to the inflow of salt water fertile agricultural land was adversely affected, causing economic loss and impacting food security and rural livelihoods. The Secretary General visited Suriname, and during his visit in July this year, he witnessed firsthand the impact climate change, particularly the climate change effect on the low-lying coastal states. He lauded our nature-based solution, such as preserving mangroves, rainforests, and other essential ecosystems. And he stated, the Caribbean is ground zero for the global climate emergency. Mr. President, that is why it is time to act now. We have delivered the $100 billion commitment in climate finance for adaptation. As such, we call for support for a research agenda that will help the region understand the cost of climate change on sectors and economies. Scaling up the means of implementation, including finance, particularly adaptation finance, capacity building, and technology transfer, and not technology dumping. Scaling up finance for adaptation and for response to loss and damage, with prioritization for Caribbean SIDS to access grant and concessionary finance, including through bilateral channels in particular. The establishment of a loss and damage facility under the UN FCCC that would provide SIDS with resources to finance loss and damage resulting from climate change. In this regard, I express appreciation to the Secretary General of the United Nations for his efforts to make the Adaptation Fund more accessible to countries affected by climate change through his Adaptation Finance Initiative. Mr. President, finance is the backbone of sustainable development. The time has come, and the time is now for a real reform of the global financial architecture, a reform that must take into consideration the unique and inherent vulnerabilities that hamper the ability of small and vulnerable economies to overcome economic, environmental, and social shocks. I therefore welcome the appointment of the high-level panel on Multidimensional Vulnerability Index, and we look forward to finding solutions to address the obstacles to realizing the index, in particular the availability of reliable data. Mr. President, the political, economic, and humanitarian crisis in Haiti remains a great concern to the region and requires the attention of the international community. In my capacity as current CARICOM chair, I am committed to exerting all efforts for a dialogue with all stakeholders in Haiti aimed at safeguarding peace and security. It is of utmost importance that any support in resolving the situation in Haiti should be on the basis of a Haitian-supported and owned plan. Conflicts and violence are currently on the rise globally in all regions, which are leading to hostilities and displacements. These hostilities and mass displacements are causing people to face paralyzing levels of poverty and food insecurity. We as member states constituting the United Nations should take up our role in maintaining international peace and security. The achievement of sustainable development is inextricably linked to upholding democratic values, good governance, and respect for human rights. We must allow countries to develop sustainable economies without obstacles. Mr. President, In today's world, differences must be resolved through dialogue and cooperation. Therefore, in our view, the long-standing embargo against Cuba and the Cuban people must be lifted. I believe, Mr. President, that young people are valuable and undeniable partners in every development aspect and in shaping the future. Let me also congratulate the General Secretariat for the establishment of a youth office in the United Nations Secretariat. As lead head within the quasi-cabinet of the Caribbean community responsible for regional youth development, I was pleased with the interaction of region's youth during the last CARICOM leaders meeting held in Suriname. I commend them for taking the responsibility and inspiring their peers to not only demand a seat at the table, but also show up consistently. On my part, Mr. President, I have pledged 10 hectares of land in Suriname for setting up an innovative campus where students and startups from the region will be facilitated to conduct research and development studies. Mr. President, since I took office 2 years ago, my government has been making efforts to bring the economy back on track and bring the development of the country on the right path from an extremely unsustainable position. While a homegrown recovery plan, a 36-month extended fund facility of the IMF, and a national multi-year development plan are in implementation, my government continues to face economic challenges and capacity constraints due to external and unforeseen shocks. Based on the impact of several crises and the measure to reform the economy, the population is going through the hardship now. Therefore, international support in this regard is of utmost importance. Mr. President, to avoid further hardships and to bring some relief to the population, we have taken a decision to re-engage with the IMF to consider where the program can be adjusted to implement the program based on the current realities in the world and to minimize the social costs of this program. We appreciate bilateral and multilateral partners who have expressed solidarity and have provided valuable support to my country and people during these challenging times. Additionally, our goal is to attract investment to improve productivity and capital allocation, which are critical for growth and poverty reduction. In conclusion, Mr. President, Secretary General, colleague heads, effective and consensus-based multilateralism is the only option for solving the interlocking challenges our world faces today. National solutions to resolve global problems have time and again proven to be ineffective and at times dangerous. Through global solutions with adapted local or national implementation, we should achieve the future we want. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, together we can, together we will, together we have, and together we are stronger. I thank you, and may God bless you all. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Suriname for the statement just made, and I request the protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Joseph R. Biden, Jr., President of the United States of America. I request the protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Joseph R. Biden Jr., President of the United States of America, and invite him to address the Assembly.
Thank you. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, my fellow leaders, in the last year, our world has experienced great upheaval. A growing crisis in food insecurity, record heat, floods and droughts, COVID-19, inflation, and a brutal, needless war. A war chosen by one man, to be very blunt. Let us speak plainly. A permanent member of the United Nations Security Council invaded its neighbor, attempted to erase a sovereign state from the map. Russia has shamelessly violated the core tenets of the United Nations Charter. No more important than the clear prohibition against countries taking the territory of their neighbor by force. Again, just today, President Putin has made overt nuclear threats against Europe and a reckless disregard for the responsibilities of the non-proliferation regime. Now, Russia's calling up more soldiers to join the fight, and the Kremlin is organizing a sham referenda to try to annex parts of Ukraine, an extremely significant violation of the UN Charter. This world should see these outrageous acts for what they are. Putin claims he had to act because Russia was threatened. But no one threatened Russia, and no one other than Russia sought conflict. In fact, we warned it was coming, and with many of you we worked to try to avert it. Putin's own words make his true purpose unmistakable. Just before he invaded, Putin asserted, and I quote, "Ukraine was created by Russia and never had, quote, real statehood." And now we see attacks on schools, railway stations, hospitals, on centers of Ukrainian history and culture. In the past, even more horrifying evidence of Russia's atrocity and war crimes. Mass graves uncovered in Izium, bodies, according to those who excavated those bodies, showing signs of torture. This war is about extinguishing Ukraine's right to exist as a state, plain and simple, and Ukraine's right to exist as a people. Whoever you are, wherever you live, whatever you believe, that should make your blood run cold. That's why 141 nations in the General Assembly came together and to unequivocally condemn Russia's war against Ukraine. The United States has marshaled massive levels of security assistance and humanitarian aid and direct economic support for Ukraine. More than $25 billion to date. Our allies and partners around the world have stepped up as well. And today, more than 40 countries represented in here have contributed billions of their own money and equipment to help Ukraine defend itself. The United States is also working closely with our allies and partners to impose costs on Russia, to deter attacks against NATO territory, to hold Russia accountable for the atrocities and war crimes. Because if nations can pursue their imperial ambitions without consequences, then we put at risk everything this very institution stands for, everything. Every victory won on the battlefield belongs to the courageous Ukrainian soldiers. But this past year, the world was tested as well. And we did not hesitate. We chose liberty. We chose sovereignty. We chose principles to which every party to the United Nations Charter is beholding. We stood with Ukraine. Like you, the United States wants this war to end on just terms, on terms we all signed up for, that you cannot seize a nation's territory by force. That the only country standing in the way of that is Russia. This body who's determined to uphold the principles and beliefs we pledge to defend as members of the United Nations must be clear, firm, and unwavering in our resolve. Ukraine has the same rights that belong to every sovereign nation. We will stand in solidarity with Ukraine. We will stand in solidarity against Russia's aggression, period. Now, it's no secret that in the contest between democracy and autocracy, the United States and I, as President, champion a vision for our world that's grounded in the values of democracy. The United States is determined to defend and strengthen democracy at home and around the world, because I believe democracy remains humanity's greatest instrument to address the challenges of our time. We're working with the G7 and like-minded countries to prove democracies can deliver for their citizens, but also deliver for the rest of the world as well. But as we meet today, the UN Charter's very basis of a stable and just rule-based order is under attack by those who wish to tear it down or distort it for their own political advantage. And the United Nations Charter was not only signed by democracies of the world, it was negotiated among citizens, dozens of nations with vastly different histories and ideologies, united in their commitment to work for peace. As President Truman said in 1945, the UN Charter, and I quote, is proof that nations like men can state their differences, can face them, and then can find common ground on which to stand, end of quote. That common ground was so straightforward, so basic, that today 193 of you, 193 member states have willingly embraced its principles. And standing up for those principles for the UN Charter is the job of every responsible member state. I reject the use of violence and war to conquer nations or expand borders through bloodshed, to stand against global politics of fear and coercion, to defend the sovereign rights of smaller nations as equal to those of larger ones, to embrace basic principles like freedom of navigation, respect for international law, and arms control. No matter what else we may disagree on, that is the common ground upon which we must stand. If you're still committed to a strong foundation for the good of every nation around the world, then the United States wants to work with you. I also believe the time has come for this institution to become more inclusive so that it can better respond to the needs of today's world. Members of the UN Security Council, including the United States, should consistently uphold and defend the UN Charter and refrain from the use of the veto, except in rare, extraordinary situations, to ensure that the Council remains credible and effective. That is also why the United States supports increasing the number of both permanent and non-permanent representatives of the Council. This includes permanent seats for those nations we have long supported and permanent seats for countries in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. The United States is committed to this vital work. In every region, we pursued new, constructive ways to work with partners to advance shared interests, from elevating the Quad in the Indo-Pacific to signing the Los Angeles Declaration of Migration and Protection at the Summit of the Americas, to joining a historic meeting of 9 Arab leaders to work toward a more peaceful, integrated Middle East, to hosting the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit in this December. As I said last year, the United States is opening an era of relentless diplomacy to address the challenges that matter most to people's lives, all people's lives. Tackling climate crisis, as the previous speaker spoke to, strengthening global health security, feeding the world. We made that priority, and 1 year later we're keeping that promise. From the day I came to office, we've led with bold climate agenda. We rejoined the Paris Agreement, convened the major climate summits, helped deliver critical agreements on the COP26. We helped get 2/3 of the world's GDP on track to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And now, I've signed a historic piece of legislation here in the United States that includes the biggest, most important climate commitment we have ever made in the history of our country, $369 billion toward climate change. That includes $10 billion in new investments in offshore wind and solar, doubling down on zero-emission vehicles, increasing energy efficiency, supporting clean manufacturing. Our Department of Energy estimates that this new law will reduce U.S. emissions by 1 gigaton a year by 2030, while unleashing a new era of clean energy-powered economic growth. Our investments will also help reduce the cost of developing clean energy technologies worldwide, not just in the United States. This is a global game changer, and none too soon. We don't have much time. We all know we're already living in a climate crisis. No one seems to doubt it after this past year. Much of Pakistan is still underwater, needs help. Meanwhile, the Horn of Africa faces unprecedented drought. Families are facing impossible choices, choosing which child to feed and wondering whether they'll survive. This is the human cost of climate change, and it's growing, not lessening. So, as I announced last year, to meet our global responsibility, my administration is working with our Congress to deliver more than $11 billion a year to international climate finance, to help lower-income countries implement their climate goals and ensure a just energy transition. Pledges at the conference, resulting in one of the largest global health fundraisers ever held in all history. We're also taking down the food crisis head on, with as many as 193 million people around the world experiencing acute food insecurity, a jump of 40 million in a year. Today I'm announcing another $2.9 billion in U.S. support for life-saving humanitarian and food security assistance for this year alone. Russia, in the meantime, is pumping out lies, trying to pin the blame for the crisis, the food crisis, on the sanctions imposed by many in the world for the aggression against Ukraine. So let me be perfectly clear about something. Our sanctions explicitly allow explicitly allow Russia the ability to export food and fertilizer. No for the work here at the UN, including your leadership, Mr. Secretary General, establishing a mechanism to export grain from Black Sea ports in Ukraine that Russia had blocked for months, and we need to make sure it's extended. We believe strongly in the need to feed the world. That's why the United States is the world's largest supporter of the World Food Program, with more than 40% of its budget. We're the leading support of the UNICEF efforts to feed children around the world. To take on a larger challenge of food insecurity, the United States introduced a call to action, a roadmap eliminating global food insecurity, that more than 100 nation member states have already supported. In June, the G7 announced more than $4.5 billion to strengthen food security. Resistant seeds into the hands of farmers who need them, while distributing fertilizer and improving fertilizer efficiency so that farmers can grow more while using less. And we're calling on all countries to refrain from banning food exports or hoarding grain while so many people are suffering. Because in every country in the world, no matter what else divides us, if parents cannot feed their children, nothing else matters if parents cannot feed their children. As we look to the future, we're working with our partners to update and create rules of the road for new challenges we face in the 21st century. We launched the Trade and Technology Council with the European Union to ensure that key technologies are developed and governed in the way that benefits behavior in cyberspace, and working to hold accountable those who use cyber attacks to threaten international peace and security. With partners in the Americas, Africa, Europe, and the Middle East, and the Indo-Pacific, we're working to build a new economic ecosystem where every nation gets a fair shot, and economic growth is resilient, sustainable, and shared. That's why the United States has championed a global minimum tax, and we will work to see it implemented so major corporations pay their fair share everywhere. It's also been the idea behind the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which the United States launched this year with 13 other Indo-Pacific economies. We're working with our partners in ASEAN and the Pacific Islands to support a vision for a critical secure, resilient supply chains that protect everyone from coercion or domination, and ensure that no country can use energy as a weapon. And as Russia's war riles the global economy, we're also calling on major global creditors, including the non-Paris Club countries, to transparently negotiate debt forgiveness for lower-income countries, to forestall broader economic and political crisis around the world. Instead of infrastructure projects that generate huge and large debt without delivering on the promised advantages, let's meet the enormous infrastructure needs around the world with transparent investments, high-standard projects that protect the rights of workers and the environment, keyed to the needs of the communities they serve, not to the contributor. That's why the United States, together with fellow G7 partners, launched a Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment. We intend to collectively mobilize $600 billion in investment through this partnership by 2027. Dozens of projects are already underway. Industrial-scale vaccine manufacturing in Senegal, transformative solar projects in Angola, first of its kind small modular nuclear power plant in Romania. These are investments that are going to deliver returns not just for those countries, but for everyone. The United States will work with every nation, including our competitors, to solve global problems like climate change. Climate diplomacy is not a favor to the United States or any other nation, and walking away hurts the entire world. Let me be direct about the competition between the United States and China. As we manage shifting geopolitical trends, the United States will conduct itself as a reasonable leader. We do not seek conflict. Will be unabashed in promoting our vision of a free, open, secure, and prosperous world and what we have to offer communities and nations. Investments that are designed not to foster dependency, but to alleviate burdens and help nations become self-sufficient. Partnerships not to create political obligation, but because we know our own success. Each of our successes increased when other nations succeed as well. When individuals have the chance to live in dignity and develop their talents, everyone benefits. Critical to that is living up to the highest goals of this institution, increasing peace and security for everyone, everywhere. The United States will not waver in our unrelenting determination to counter and thwart the continuing terrorist threats to our world. We remain committed to our One China policy, which has helped prevent conflict for 4 decades. And we continue to oppose unilateral changes in the status quo by either side. We support an African Union-led peace process to end the fighting in Ethiopia, restore security for all its people. In Venezuela, where years of political oppression have driven more than 6 million people from that country, we urge the Venezuelan-led dialogue and return to free and fair elections. We continue to stand with our neighbor in Haiti as it faces political, fueled gang violence and an enormous human crisis. And we call on the world to do the same. We have more to do. We'll continue to back the UN-mediated truce in Yemen, which has delivered precious months of peace to people that have suffered years of war. To Israel's security, full stop. And a negotiated two-state solution remains, in our view, the best way to ensure Israel's security and prosperity for the future and give the Palestinians the state to which they are entitled. Both sides to fully respect the equal rights of their citizens. Both people enjoying equal measure of freedom and dignity. Let me also urge every nation to recommit to strengthening the nuclear non-proliferation regime through diplomacy. No matter what else is happening in the world, the United States is ready to pursue critical arms control measures. A nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. The 5 permanent members of the Security Council just reaffirmed proliferation ideals embraced by every other nation at the 10th NPT Review Conference. And again today, as I said, they're making irresponsible nuclear threats to use nuclear weapons. China is conducting an unprecedented concerning nuclear buildup without any transparency. Despite our efforts to begin serious and sustained diplomacy, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea continues to blatantly violate UN sanctions. And while the United States is prepared for a mutual return to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action if Iran steps up to its obligations, the United States is clear. We will not allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon. I continue to believe that diplomacy is the best way to achieve this outcome. The non-proliferation regime is one of human rights. Perhaps singular among this body's achievements stands the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is the standard by which our forebears challenged us to measure ourselves. They made clear in 1948, human rights are the basis for all that we seek to achieve. And yet today in 2022, fundamental freedoms are at risk in every part of our world. From the violations in Xinjiang, detailed recent reports by the Office of UN and U.S. reports detailing by the U.S. High Commissioner, to the horrible abuses against pro-democracy activists and ethnic minorities by the military regime in Burma, to the increased repression of women and girls by the Taliban in Afghanistan. Their basic rights. But here's what I know. The future will be won by those countries that unleash the full potential of their populations, where women and girls can exercise equal rights, including basic reproductive rights, and contribute fully to building a stronger economies and more resilient societies, where religious and ethnic minorities can live their lives without harassment and contribute to the fabric of their communities, where the LGBTQ plus community, individuals, live and love freely without being targeted with violence, where citizens can question and criticize their leaders without fear of reprisal. The United States will always promote human rights and the values enshrined in the UN Charter in our own country and around the world. Is at its core an act of dauntless hope. Let me say that again. It's an act of dauntless hope. Think about the vision of those first delegates who undertook a seemingly impossible task while the world was still smoldering. Think about how divided the people of the world must have felt with the fresh grief of millions dead, the genocidal horrors of the Holocaust exposed. They had every right to believe only the worst of humanity. Instead, they reached for what was best in all of us, and they strove to build something better. Enduring peace, comity among nations, equal rights for every member of the human family, cooperation for the advancement of all humankind. My fellow leaders, the challenges we face today are great indeed, but our capacity is greater. Our commitment must be greater still. So let's stand together to again declare the unmistakable resolve that nations of the world are united still, that we stand for the values of the UN Charter, that we still believe by working together we can bend the arc of history toward a freer and more just world for all our children, although none of us have fully achieved it. We're not passive witnesses to history. We are the authors of history. We can do this. We have to do it for ourselves and for our future, for humankind. Thank you for your tolerance, for listening to me. I appreciate it very much. God bless you all.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the United States of America for the statement. While we suspend the meeting for 5 minutes before resuming to hear the next speaker.